Hi everyone, good to see you here. I'm Doreen de Leeuw. I was mostly in charge of the PR and media, and I'm together here with
Jack, and I was in charge of the facilities. There were no facilities this year, so I helped everyone a bit.
Yes, so everyone finished their case. Again, congratulations to the people who made the top 10. That's really well done. I hope you guys enjoyed working on the case today again, and that you learned a bit about the Airbnb market in Amsterdam, and that you, of course, found some interesting results.
Yeah, everyone handed in their reports, their cases and whatever, and the jury is already working hard on analyzing them and on judging them. Later tonight, the finalists will have drinks or social event with the sponsors and with us, of course. But first, serious business. Here is Aarhus University with the first presentation.
Don't forget to unmute yourself when you start, and maybe start by introducing yourselves, who you guys are, and then we start the presentation. You guys have 5 minutes for this. We understand it was a bit of a rush with handing in everything at 5 p.m.
And already presenting.
And it's the big challenge being the first. So we can't hear you yet, so can you please unmute yourself?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Okay, so I'll first here try to share my screen.
Perfect.
Share content. Okay, I hope you can see the slides here.
Not yet.
And then how about now? Is it possible for you to see the slides?
Yeah, it's possible now. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, so just let me know when I should get started.
You can start whenever you feel ready.
All right. So let's get started here. So I'm representing the team from Aarhus, and I represent the work that we have done today and yesterday on the effect of Airbnb on the housing market. And we provide some new evidence from Amsterdam here. So first, we have two motivations for at least looking at Airbnb and the housing markets. So here in panel A, you can see on postal code 4-digit level how the density of Airbnb lists has changed over time. So you can clearly see that the density has increased from 08 to 15, and then slowly decaying again afterwards. And on panel B, you have the changes in time on market for each housing. You'll see an increase from 2008 to 2014, 15. And then afterwards, 15, the time on market just rapidly decreases. So could this be due to Airbnb? So we find that, so how to do this? So we face some serious identification issues because there's a number of effects, both affecting the number of Airbnb and the house prices at the same time. So how to look at this? So we first start out by running just the hedonic price regression. So we have the Y variable as our log square meter price, and then we have the density of Airbnb, and then fixed effects for year for the month of the transaction. And the final fixed effects is, we have it as a third fixed effects also. Yeah, which is which postal code the transaction took place in. And here we find an effect of 0.06%. So that is, if there's an additional Airbnb listing within 200 meters from the house, then the price increases by 0.06%. However, we don't really trust this result because we face this identification issues. So then we run an IV price regression. Here we find an effect of roughly 0.00%, and then we did a lagged IV approach where we found around 0.2%. So how did we do this? First, to construct the IV variables, we went into TripAdvisor, took the top 100 attractions, and sat down and write down the longitude and latitude for each of those and plotted them on the panel B map that you can see here. And what stands out is that all of them mostly are concentrated in the center of Amsterdam. Second, we saw that the Google Trends Index for worldwide Airbnb searches has more or less just increased from 2011, where we plot this here, and then some stagnating after 19, but this is not relevant for our data. So we use these two here to base our instrument on. So in detail, the steps from raw data to analysis is the following. So we start out by doing principal components on a heterogeneous correlation matrix. So what does this mean? So we take the correlation between the housing characteristics and we calculate the appropriate correlation coefficient. So if you have two continuous variables, we use the Pearson correlation, the well-known one. If we have a continuous and an ordinal variable, we use the polycerial, and if we have two ordinal ones, we use the polychoric. And this approach has been shown to better reconstructing the data. Okay, and we do this only on the housing characteristics, so 10 variables. Then to construct the instrumental variables, we use the top attractions that I showed you here, the number of view views for each of those, and the Google Trends that I also showed. We constructed 3, but here I only use the third one. Okay, so the third one here is we rank the top 10 nearest, the nearest attractions, and we weigh them by the number of reviews that they had. So this is this D and subscript and MI, yeah. And then we take this number here and multiply it by the trend index. So this sort of should reflect the development in Airbnb. And this should not have any relation to the house prices in Amsterdam because this index is the worldwide index. Then we use the fixed effects with Ivy, as shown here in the regressions, using the instrumental variable I just explained. And also we did for the lagged Ivy, we took the mean of the log square meter prices for the past and lagged those. So we did some robustness checks that I won't have too much time to go into, but one of the key ones is that we found this U-shape between log square price and TOM to be significant. Thank you.
Thank you, Aarhus University. It was nice to follow your presentation and good to see that you created maps as well with the density of the Airbnbs.
Yeah. For the next teams, can you please hand in your presentations and your slides because we haven't received everyone's yet. And for the next group, please unmute yourself already. The next group will be the new economic.
The new economic school, yes.
The new economic school. Great. So thank you, Aarhus. It's a new economic school. Is already tuned in or?
Yeah, we're here. Do you hear us?
Ah, yeah.
Yes, we can see you.
Perfect. Well, you can start whenever you feel ready. And if you can put your slides on the, I don't know how that works.
Okay. Okay, let's start. I'm Artemy Krolkov, and we will tell you about our research about Airbnb impact on the housing market in Amsterdam. So, our expectation is that matching efficiency of short-run rents will increase after introduction of Airbnb, and that will decrease supply of the long-term rent, and the prices of houses should go up because the fundamental price, the discounted sum of the profits from the house, will increase. And what is about the direction of the focus?
And we also think that it is possible that Airbnb is more developed in some regions, but is less developed in other regions, and it might redirect the flows of tourists.
So firstly, we estimated simple LS, a canonic model with different fixed effects. We tried several fixed effects specifications. Fixed effects on the most robust specifications from our point of view is fixed effects on each month and small neighborhood on each pair. And we estimated positive effect of density on the price of the house around 0.1%. And negative effect of distance, rather small though economically. It's significant statistically, but I don't think it's significant economically. Yeah, and this effect of density is nonlinear, so it has diminishing marginal electrons. Yeah, we also estimated different effects for different type of houses. The biggest effect was for the row houses. Yeah, but of course, this specification has some problems. The main problem is indigeneity. The house may have some unobserved characteristics, the neighborhood, the place, that we do not able to capture with our fixed effects. Yeah, so we then estimated IV model, and my colleague Roman will tell about it.
Yes, we need some instrument to fight indigeneity, and we decided to use the approach of the work Baron 2021. They used Google Trend, as in the previous presentation, and the instrument, it's a Bartik instrument. That means that it's an interaction between some exogenous time series, and in our case, it's Google Trend popularity divided by number of tourists in Europe, because it significantly increased, and times number of tourist attraction near each flat. It's number of bars, museums, art centers, and so on. And we estimate a fixed effect regression, and we also have positive significant impact, but it's only 0.05%. Yes, you can see the table. Next slide. Yes, and today we did a survival analysis. Assume that probability of being sold at period T is here, and we estimated this probability and find that RNB density is significant, is positively significant, meaning that it increases the probability of being sold. But when we add our Bartik instrument, we obtain the negative result, meaning that higher density of RNB leads to lower probability of being sold for flats.
Yeah, you can see this on the table with instrument and without. Yeah, and to conclude, our estimation that Airbnb increased prices of the house in Amsterdam, but not all increase was due to Airbnb. Actually, there was a small part of this, and this effect was heterogeneous. For example, it was different for different types of houses. But the relationship is causal. We showed it using IV, and also Airbnb increased the time on the market for houses that are selling. We think it's due to different effects. For example, higher opportunity cost for the owners of this house. They can short rent it for the Airbnb visitors. Okay, thank you for listening to us. I think that's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hey, can you please turn off your screen sharing so that we can do the next one? And thanks again.
Yes. Next university we're going to see is in a place with much better weather than any other university that's in the final. We're going to go to Stellenbosch University.
Don't forget to unmute yourself once you're connected.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Excellent.
And good luck.
I think you can see our screen now.
Not
Hi, guys.
yet. Yeah.
This is Stellenbosch. Welcome to our presentation on causal effects of Airbnb on housing prices in Amsterdam. So in general, we find that there is lacking evidence of causal effect of Airbnb on the market prices or housing prices. So we provide this evidence using difference method, and so using fixed effect for the data that span from 2008 to 2018. And we also provide some descriptive of the figure that shows the spread of the houses prices over time, which you can see from the graph, which has a trend. And also we can see the differences or spread between asking price and the selling price over time, which also has a kink near around 2015 when the legislative was adopted.
One of the methods that we used was differences and differences, which is used to work out an average treatment effect when there isn't necessarily a random selection or random assignment. So we worked out the treatment. So the treatment was determined by the ratio or the division of density over the distance. In 2018, we worked out what the median of that value was, and then for each zip code address, we aggregated the data, and then for every zip code that had a greater of that proximity measurement than the median, which was 6.16, that was the treated group, and then everything else was the control group. And then we worked out a difference in differences on the log of the price, the spread between the asking price and the final price, and then also the time on market. As you can see, we managed to see quite a large difference from before Airbnb got to Amsterdam to after Airbnb got to Amsterdam on the log of the prices. The outcome was about 15% increase. There was no statistical difference between the effect of the spread, and there was a negative effect on the time on market of about minus 18%. When including covariates of different housing characteristics, the result was still significant.
Okay, so as well as the on top of the differences specification, we also used the fixed effects model. And essentially what this did was we noted that in the period from 2000 to 2018, some houses were sold multiple times. So 50% of the sales were once-off houses being sold, but the rest were houses that had been sold multiple times. I think there were about 23,000 of them. And so if you see the change in these values such as price or spread or time on market for houses that have been sold more than once, over time we see so we essentially use then a house-specific fixed effects method to see what is the impact on specific houses when density or the proximity measure of Airbnbs increase. So firstly, with regards to the price, log of price does have a significant, or density does have a significant effect on log of price, even when controlling for things that, so this has a causal interpretation unless there are time varying or group varying factors, emitted variables that confound the effect. So there shouldn't be major group specific factors because these are individual locations, individual houses, nor should there be major location differences. However, like to ensure that this is the case, we control for things like quality, monumental status, house size, which is an index that we create using PCA of size, rooms, and volume. And this is so that if, in order to sell the house so that it can get a better price, but also to make it more marketable for tourists who might use it for Airbnb purposes, then this would cause a biasing effect. So we include these, and we find that the effect on prices is still significant of density. And then using the fixed effect model also for spread and the time on market, we find significant negative effects, which means that the proximity to Airbnb decreases the spread as well as the time on the market, which is very interesting because it essentially means that proximity to Airbnb decreases frictions in the housing market and increases the demand for buying housing. Yeah, so I think that's about all our time, and those are the results that we had, which we thought was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stellenbosch University, for your insightful presentation. Don't forget to turn off your screen sharing so the next group can continue after you.
The next group will be Cambridge University. So please unmute yourself and show your slides and start whenever you feel like.
Good luck.
Good luck, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. My name is Christian, and I am representing Cambridge University today. And if there's one thing about the takeaways from our work, really, it is that heterogeneities and non-linearities matter hugely. So we're using a random forest technique to address these non-linearities and heterogeneities in the housing market. So the first thing we did was think quite hard about what identification means in this example. So we're obviously in a hedonic pricing world, and we want to find the effect of some treatment, and in this case would be Airbnb, which we represent with A here on price. And really there are quite a few confounding factors like tourism demand, which or the interest rates and demographic composition of the people of Amsterdam, the real income, all of these things which can push demand and supply in this housing market. So we really have to do even harder than usual and keep both two functions fixed. So what we use for that then is a non-parametric framework where we look at each individual location, where location is defined in terms of a metric of similarity, and we see what are the effects, the causal effects of Airbnb for that specific type of house. And that's why we use these local estimating equations, where really we're just taking the average partial effect at that location, which we call theta x. So now that we thought a bit about identification, we thought that the random forest would be the perfect methodology to use. So, and in particular, the generalized random forest. Just obviously, I can't explain this in 5 minutes, but for people who haven't seen this before, a forest is an average estimate that is created out of many decision trees, where at the end of each of these decision trees, there is some prediction for the outcome. And that prediction will depend on what the covariates are. So all these other characteristics, like the number of rooms and all the other interesting things about the houses. Or potentially also about Amsterdam, just a time variable could be included, many things. So the random forest automatically includes every covariate or interaction that predicts house prices or Airbnb presence. That way we find all the potential confounders in an even smarter way, and that's what double robustness is. So for example, we use spatial coordinates and time, and we can do that because the random forest will select all the things that matter and kick out all the things that don't matter. So we don't have this problem of having too many fixed effects. And the nice thing is that actually our estimator will be asymptotically normal in the end at each of the locations. So some of our key results are that there is a lot of heterogeneity in the effect of, for example, distance and density on house prices in Amsterdam. For example, we find that the mean of the distance implies that for each additional 100 meters in distance from an Airbnb, price on average actually increases. So we find that conditioning on all the factors, which for example are time fixed effects, like they would account for tourism demand, etc., etc. There's actually an increase if you're further away from Airbnb. So first, at least for some locations, it looks like there is a benefit in being further away, which may be due to the negative externalities. And a similar story can be told about the density estimate. So the heterogeneous treatment effects of distance to Airbnb on price in Amsterdam can be seen in this map. Wherever it's darker, it's more positive, and wherever it's lighter, it's more negative. So there's a lot of variation in here, which remains to be explained. One thing that can explain some variation is, for example, that as prices increase, the average effect of distance to an Airbnb on the price of the house increases. So in richer neighborhoods, the Airbnb is worse for house prices. And that may just be that rich people are less likely to, or are more negatively, have a higher negative externality from the Airbnb presence. So really, we need to take into account this nuanced effect. We know that heterogeneity matters. In our paper, we compare this to a benchmark panel model with time and location fixed effects. And we really need to consider some general, more general equilibrium model, though, given the fact that we see all these heterogeneities, and even if the local effect is negative, it may be positive more broadly because the local long-term rental gets displaced. So for future research, we would suggest that we have a deeper dive into heterogeneity, look closer at the mechanisms, and also consider the general equilibrium consequences.
Yes, thanks. Fun to see a random forest as well. It's not really common. And yeah, can you please stop sharing your screen so that the next one can enter the chat? Thanks so much.
Yes, and next university is going to be Lund University. So yeah, take the floor. Don't forget to unmute yourself, and good luck.
Great, thank you very much. Hello from a sunny but cold southern Sweden. Our paper is titled Hostile Takeover, the Effects of Home Sharing on the Amsterdam Housing Market, which is a title inspired by the phenomenon that's occurred in recent years of Airbnb listings popping up all over the city of Amsterdam, which is crowding out long-term rental accommodation, which we'll see soon has effects on the property market more generally. And this is a phenomenon that's been noted widely in the media and even in the international press, as we can see here. However, it's quite hard to estimate the effect of things like Airbnb on property prices. And this is for two main reasons. Firstly, Airbnb listings aren't randomly assigned across the city. So if we were to compare two houses with different levels of Airbnb, we aren't able to be sure that we're not confounding the effect of Airbnbs with some other measure of the attractiveness of the house, which is correlated with Airbnbs appearing. Similarly, whenever you try to model the effect of anything on house prices, you can never be sure that you can control for everything. And that's because there's so many characteristics of a property that we just can't observe. So to get around these two issues, we've tried to identify as good as random variation in the spread of Airbnb across the city. And we do so using a shift share instrument, where we interact the level of touristiness of each house in our data set with a measure of the demand for Airbnb, which is growing over time, for which we use Google Trends data. So to try and explain what a shift share instrument is, I'll try to do so visually. So here on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a visualization of the touristiness of different parts of the city. And this is data that we've taken from TripAdvisor.com for the top 30 tourist attractions in the city, with bigger circles corresponding to more visited tourist attractions. And on the right-hand side, you can see our measure of demand for Airbnb. And at the moment, this graph only goes as far as 2007, which is the year before Airbnb actually was introduced. So at the moment, there's no demand. But as Airbnb opens, we start to see some Airbnbs pop up across the city here in blue dots. And as demand for Airbnb, as measured by the Google Trends here on the right-hand side, starts to increase, we can see more and more Airbnbs popping up all over the city. And the density of these Airbnbs is typically higher in the areas which are more touristy. So we have a share of touristiness for each area in the city, which we calculate at the household level. And the variation in demand over time causes some exogenous variation in the level of Airbnbs in the vicinity of each household. So what do we find? Well, we find that for every increase of 100 Airbnb listings within 250 meters of a house, that there's a corresponding increase in sales prices of about 8%, which for the average house price in our sample corresponds to about 24,000 euros. We also find that this is driven by an equal increase in asking prices. And in addition, we do some further analysis to look at the market equilibrium effects using a lagged instrument for asking prices, where we find no effect of Airbnb density or asking prices on the quantity of sales in a neighborhood or the time that houses spend on markets. Now, anybody who's done their introduction to microeconomics course in first year of their bachelor will know that in a supply and demand model with a good which has an inelastic short-term supply, such as houses, if you have an upward shift in demand, this will lead to an increase in prices, which is capitalized by the seller and the market, reaching a higher equilibrium price, but without changing the quantity demanded or supplied in the market. And this is exactly what we find here, implying that the market for housing in Amsterdam is actually an efficient market. So what does this mean for policy? Well, as we found that increased Airbnb listings in different areas of the city do lead to increased house prices, if policymakers are only interested in house prices as an outcome, then clearly intervention could be required to try and rein in the growth in house prices. And to that end, there has been some recent policies brought in recent years, which could be the focus of further research to try and understand the effects of those policies, such as a reduction of the cap on the number of days an Airbnb can be rented out in a year. And even some neighborhoods in the city have banned Airbnb listings in the past about a year and a half, I think. So it'll be really interesting to see if anybody does some analysis on the effects of these. But beyond prices, there's an overall welfare perspective that we need to think about. So if we had more time or maybe more data, we'd love to look at what's the overall effect on life satisfaction for people living in Amsterdam themselves, and also to look at how the proliferation of Airbnb has affected the composition of the market in terms of the supply of housing being sold and bought and the agents in the market themselves. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for your attention. I just want to say that we had a great time over the past 2 days working on this project, and I'd love to thank the Econometric Game's organizers and the case maker and the jury for setting everything up perfectly for us, and to wish everybody else the best of luck in the rest of the competition.
Thank you, Lund University. We also enjoyed organizing it, so I'm really happy you enjoyed it as well. Yeah, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, okay, so don't forget to leave the chat or the whole thing. And the next university will be the University of Antwerp. So good luck. Don't forget to share your screen and
unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Go whenever you're ready.
Hi. So thank you, everyone. So I will be presenting the results from my university. So we were a bit strategic and decided to jump right into the empirical and data part, just because we knew 6 or 5 teams before us would be presenting the background as well. So hopefully we can get through all of our empirics. So to start, we have our data, which is a microdata on housing transactions and Airbnb listings in Amsterdam. We reduce the data twice. So first we remove outliers, and then for our empirical strategy, we reduce it further to areas that have or addresses that are in the data set twice. Now, one reason we reduce it to addresses that are seen twice is in order to account for some fixed effects, but also because addresses with more than 2 observations in the data set, so addresses that have had more than three or more sales, are not statistically similar to the rest of the data. So we're careful with not having any sort of selection bias in our reduced sample size. So we have here, just to show our what we learned from QGIS in preparation. So we have our heat maps from Airbnb listings in Amsterdam. So starting in 2008, and then every 2 years up to 2018. So you can see that there's been a significant kind of explosion of Airbnbs in Amsterdam, particularly surrounding the canals or the city center. So as I mentioned, we reduce our data set to only the addresses with 2 observations. So we do this so we can do a first difference specification. So what the first difference specification does is it eliminates the previous, or it takes the current value of all variables and then subtracts the previous value from these. So this is a nice way to kind of remove fixed effects without including about 20,000 dummy variables, because my computer refused to. So so not only is it computationally easier, but when there are only two time periods, the first difference in fixed effects models have the same estimations. So with this first difference specification, we believe we have eliminated the time invariant endogeneity. However, we still have to worry about time variant endogeneity that is also very specific to each location. So to do so, we combine first difference with IV, and we use 2 different instruments since there are 2 endogenous measures for Airbnb. Our first is the more traditional, based on literature and also many other groups seem to have interacted. We use top 10 tourist destinations according to TripAdvisor, and we interacted it with Google Trends for Airbnb Amsterdam. Now, just like the first difference, we also take the difference between these. So it's a change in the shift share between the two observations for the address. Our second instrument is a little more unique. So we actually used still the inverse distance to the top 10, but we interacted this with tweets. So tweets involving or that have the name of these locations. So for example, Anne Frank House, any tweet that has Anne Frank House together or the hashtag Anne Frank House. And then, so our final empirical strategy is looking at the probability of a house being sold within a given amount of times, which is measured in months. So this is just a linear probability model, which we also will use instruments for as well. So some results. So our baseline model, so this is our first difference without instruments. So our preferred specification would be the fourth column, since this also includes number of months between sales, just to control for houses that maybe are on them or go longer between sales versus shorter between sales, as they might be different. So the dependent variable is actually measured in thousands of euros. So we can see with distance, so for each meter the nearest Airbnb is, the price will increase by actually just 6 euros. And then for density, this to interpret this coefficient, it's for each additional Airbnb within a 250 meter radius. The price will the listing price will increase by 24 euros. So next we have our IV results using first differences. And then we have here on our different columns, different outcome variables. So the first outcome is the selling price. The second outcome is the list price. And the last one is the difference between the two. And so you can see again, density will increase the price, and the further away, the higher the price. We also do robustness checks where we reduce the sample to only the areas with identical values between each observation. And when we do this, we actually find very similar numbers or very similar significance, but a much higher magnitude. So we also find, that as Airbnbs increase, so as it gets so as there are more Airbnbs or they're further away, we actually find that the houses will sell quicker. So they're more likely to sell in the first few months. So overall, we find that the effect of Airbnb has actually been different. So the increase in density has raised prices, but the decrease in the distance to the nearest Airbnb has caused house values to decrease. Overall, we believe that this will be most negative for disadvantaged groups. So we think that should be taken into account for policy. So thank you for listening, and sorry for going over a bit.
Thank you so much. No problem. Hey, yeah, thanks again. Don't forget to turn off your mic. Yeah, thank you. And so that we can go on with the next one.
Yes, and the next one is going to be Erasmus University. So don't forget to unmute yourself, share your screen, and good luck.
Yes, thanks. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome. Greetings from Rotterdam. Behind me, you can see the nice Erasmus Bridge from Rotterdam. And today we'll present our work with, for me, Luc van Mazekers, with my teammates Inge, Olivier, and Terry. Over the last 13 years, we have experienced, or we have seen that Airbnb listings have increased rapidly in Amsterdam. So in the maps you see that in 2008 there were only a few Airbnbs listed in Amsterdam. In 2012, this was already a lot more. And in 2018, Amsterdam is literally full of Airbnbs. And our main question is, what is the causal effect of this increase in Airbnb listings on the price of properties in Amsterdam? We observed that over time, both, the Airbnb listings, especially after 2008, but also the housing prices in Amsterdam increase. So the main question is this a causal effect, or is there some underlying or other variables that influence this increase in house prices. Our methodology is as follows. As dependent variable, we have house prices. As independent variable, we have the Airbnb density, and we measure this density by the number of listed Airbnbs within 250 meters of a property. As approach, we use a two-stage difference in difference approach, where we control for for zip code level fixed effects, but also for year-month fixed effects. Besides that, we control for some house attributes like the size of the house, the number of rooms, the type of house. Next, we construct instruments to control for time on the market and listing price. So because time on the market and the sale price influence each other, we cannot naively add time on the market as a control in our regression. We need instruments for that. And as instruments, we use the mean listing price, the mean sale price, and the mean time on the market of properties that were listed in the half a year before the listing of the considered property. And then also we only consider the properties within the same zip code. To measure also Airbnb density, the effect of Airbnb density, and make sure that there's no endogeneity, we adopt a Bartik instrument. A Bartik instrument, also called share-shift instrument or shift-share instrument, is basically an interaction between an exogenous time series and a cross-sectional exposure variable. In our case, we use as exogenous time series Google Trends data, which I noticed other groups use as well. And we use the global search for Airbnb, the keyword Airbnb on Google over months. As the cross-sectional exposure variable, we use the number of coffee shops in the different zip codes in Amsterdam, because we believe that the number of coffee shops gives an indication of the touristiness of different zip codes. And we therefore also assume that that householders or that potential hosts in areas with many coffee shops are more likely to rent out their house as a response to the higher awareness of Airbnb. We also use cluster robust standard errors to make sure that we have unbiased estimates of the standard errors. Actually, over all the settings, so with different setups, we find a stable average effect of Airbnb of 0.05 to 0.06%. This means that for every 100 additional Airbnb listings within 250 meters, the average price of your property increases by 5 to 6%. We also did some checks to see if the effects are different for different types of properties. And we found, and it's interesting, that low segment properties, which are in the bottom 25% quantile of the prices, the effect is higher, 0.06%, than for the properties that are in the top 25% quantile, which is 0.02%. And we also observed that the effect for houses is larger than the effect for apartments. So what are main findings? With the average density, so the average density is about 70 listings within 250 meters of the property. This means that the increase in house prices for such a property is about 3.5% as a result of Airbnb listings. We find, as we said, that cheaper housing is more affected. And we also observed by adding a quadratic term that there is a diminishing effect of Airbnbs. So when the number of Airbnbs is low in an area, adding additional Airbnb listings is going to increase the prices more than when the level of Airbnbs is already high in a certain area. And we believe that effective policies should focus on the cheaper segment of the housing market, because especially in this segment, we see that the effect of Airbnb is larger. And then finally, we observed that Airbnb causes housing prices to get high. And well, you may interpret yourself what we mean by that. Thanks a lot for your attention. Well, we hope, or let's go back to Amsterdam.
Thank you from Rotterdam. Nice to see that you incorporated the coffee shops in your analysis. As we all know, these are for some an advantage, for some a problem in Amsterdam. So thank you for your interesting presentation. Don't forget to turn off your screen sharing and mute yourself again, and we can continue with the next presentation.
We can continue, yeah. So the next group, the next university is Universiteit de Lausanne. Yeah, take off, give your best, and whenever you're ready.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Maxime from the University of Lausanne, and I'm going to present you our project on Airbnb, real estate prices and bargaining power. As you already know, Airbnb density in Amsterdam skyrocketed between 2010 and 2018. As you can see from the top left map, this is the density in Amsterdam of Airbnbs, and it increased, with respect to 2018. Now, in the two bottom maps, you see the increasing price in the real estate market in Amsterdam between 2010 and 2018. Now, the questions we're going to be after today is whether, the increased Airbnb density that we observe play a role in, the housing price increase. As you already know, there is a big identification issue. So if you regress prices onto Airbnb densities, you will suffer from heterogeneity. So a solution for that is to use the so-called shift-share IV identification strategy, where shift stands for the Google Trends searches for Amsterdam and Airbnb. Alternatively, we use also the number of Airbnb reviews for Amsterdam's. And the share part comes from various indices of touristiness. This totally makes us 4 instruments that we use in different specifications. Now, an instrumental variable is only going to be the interaction between the shift and the share component. This will allow us to perform 2 SLS estimations of the effect of Airbnb density on real estate prices. Now, as for any instrument, we have to discuss its relevance and exogeneity. And our instrument is very likely to correlate with the presence of Airbnbs in a given area because, of course, wherever it's interesting to be as a tourist will probably increase the number of Airbnbs in the location. But at the same time, there is no reason to believe that the interaction between Google Trends or reviews from Airbnb with the touristiness of a location has a direct effect on prices. So I'm going to show you now some results. So in this table, you see our 2 SLS specification. And different columns, iteratively include controls. First we have a baseline estimation, then we include some fixed effects for the year, for the zip code, and then we include some controls, namely tourism, population, financial, and also controls about economic activity. Now, as you can see clearly from the table, one additional Airbnb listing in a radius of 250 meters increases on average real estate prices by 6 to 13 euros per square meter in that location. And those effects are extremely significant. Now, we asked ourselves whether these effects were either heterogeneous and persistent. Now, to address the first question, what we did is basically interacting the Airbnb density with the distance of the location from the city center of Amsterdam that we took to be the train station. Now, as you can see from the figure on top, it doesn't seem like the effect is heterogeneous. Actually, all those dots show you the coefficients for various, instruments, and they seem to be constant, and it doesn't really matter, what is the distance between from the center. Now, when it comes to persistence, what we did is that we borrowed from the macroeconometric literature, and we did what we call in this literature local projections. So we considered our data as a dynamic system. We included some lags of the controls and the endogenous variables, and then we could observe what's the effect of a shock to the Airbnb presence in Amsterdam onto the prices. Again, the shock is instrumented using the shift share IV. And as you can see, this effect takes a bit of time to kick in. Those are months. So it takes about 12 to 20 months to kick in, but then the effect is positive, persistent, and significant. Now, the conclusions from this project is that Airbnb clearly impacts prices. Now, in that, more Airbnb listings make houses more expensive on average. And it seems that this effect is very homogeneous throughout Amsterdam, although it is very persistent. And, the policy implications are that, if local policymakers care about limiting real estate price inflation, then limiting the presence of Airbnb might be beneficial. But, when you implement such policies, you have to care about distributional effects, and these might not be desirable. In particular, we made some deeper analysis where we revealed that the buyer's bargaining power tends to increase with the presence of Airbnbs. But for the sake of time, I will not be able to disclose you those results, although they're in the paper. So I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much. Hey, can you turn off your mic and your screen? Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. We're going to go to the next group, and that's going to be the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. So good luck. Don't forget to unmute yourself again, share your screen, and we can all enjoy your presentation.
Good luck.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Welcome to the Team VU presentation. My name is Niels Ota, and I'll be presenting on behalf of the rest of the team. I'll be presenting the results of the findings of our paper on the effect of Airbnb on the Amsterdam housing market. So in the interest of time, I'm going to give you more of a high-level overview and not go into the details of into the nitty-gritty details. So without further ado, let's get started. So as locals ourselves, we can attest to the limited space in Amsterdam. People like ourselves, but also young professionals like Batu, who have just entered the housing market, are experiencing an explosion in housing prices over the last couple of years. And meantime, people like Fred the tourist have seen an explosion in the number of Airbnb offerings in Amsterdam over the period from 2008 to 2018. So there's an increase in housing prices, and there's an increase in number of Airbnbs available. Now, the question you might ask yourself is, well, is that change in Airbnb activity causing the change in housing prices? Well, that means the model we're interested in estimating is the causal relationship between Airbnb activity and housing prices. So as a baseline model, we used ordinary least squares with fixed effects on the zip code and the time, besides other house amenity variables to control. And what we found was that there was no significant effect before 2014. So what happened in 2014? Well, the government of Amsterdam passed lenient legislation, making it easier for homeowners to sublet their apartment on Airbnb. And what we found was after that regulation was passed in 2014, we found increased Airbnb activity is associated with an increase in house prices. And to be precise, a 1% increase in Airbnb activity caused on average, or was associated with, on average, a 0.02% increase in house prices. Now, you may ask yourself, well, this causal relationship that we want to measure between Airbnb activity and house prices, is that what we're actually measuring using ordinary least squares? And the answer is no. For instance, there could be an effect going the other direction, or population growth could be pushing both variables upwards. In both cases, we get endogeneity, which obscure the relationship and make our parameters really not usable. So additionally, the time on the market provides interesting information about the house prices. So what results did we find estimating a model that can capture these relationships and then also single out the relationship of Airbnb activity on house prices? Well, to estimate this, we used a two-stage Server regression with instrumental variables. The instrumental variables included the shift share instrumental variable described in many presentations before. And what we saw was, in this setting, an Airbnb activity or Airbnb activity positively affects house prices in Amsterdam. And again, this effect is amplified strongly after 2014. And in this case, a 1% increase in Airbnb activity increases house prices by about 0.1% after 2014. And the legislation in this case caused the impact of Airbnb activity to increase fivefold. So what should you take away from this presentation? Well, it's the give and take between legislation and house prices. If strict policy with regards to short-term rental is implemented, then housing prices that will have a negative effect on housing prices, pushing it down, and there will be more space for young professionals like Patu to live in Amsterdam. On the flip side, if more lenient policy is adopted, then Fred the tourist will have many more Airbnbs to choose from. So the takeaway here, or the implication of this research, is that the Amsterdam government influences house prices with policy. So we'd like to thank the Econometric Game Committee for organizing this case. We had lots of fun working on it, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, VU team. That was a really insightful presentation. Thank you again. Don't forget to unmute yourself, stop sharing your screen, so everything is ready for the next group, which is going to be
the Norwegian School of Economics. Good luck. Don't forget to unmute yourself if you didn't already, and then you can start whenever. Yeah, we can now. You can start whenever you are ready.
Okay. Yeah, so we are the last group out. We're from the Norwegian School of Economics. And our title is Travel Like a Human or Live Like a Human. The reason we chose this title is because the slogan of Airbnb is Travel Like a Human. But you can ask yourself, is this going at the cost, Travel Like a Human, as the people actually living as human in a city like the Amsterdam? So we will focus on two questions. The first one is, what are the local effects of Airbnb on housing markets and local residents? And secondly, what did Airbnb change and how did they change the behavioral patterns of sellers and buyers in the housing market? Our motivation is, of course, the increase in housing prices in the Netherlands, especially in Amsterdam, with the same time the increase in prices for Airbnb. And we ask, is this a causal effect? Is the Airbnb increasing the housing prices? So first here we have a map of average housing price per square meter in Amsterdam by zip code. And you can see that in the center there is like a darker red color and a darker orange where they're the most expensive. And in green you have the different tourist attractions. And then, very interesting, if you see now in 2018, you see a big shift. Here you can see that in the center, the prices have been increasing a lot more. And it's around the area where there's the tourist attraction. And also here in Crossing, we have public toilets. The reason why we include public toilet is because it's a good measure of tourist flow, actually, but it doesn't affect housing prices. So we use two different methods in this analysis. First, we use 2SLS. We use a shift share instrument based on Google Trends on Airbnb and Airbnb in Amsterdam. And then we also use public toilets, as I just mentioned. And then secondly, we use a structural equation approach where we use mortgages by Google Trends as an instrument on time on the market. And then we also use quality as an instrument for the price gap. And our main results are, there is this effect that goes both ways. On one side, you have a positive price effect. Airbnb is increasing prices because they're increasing demand, so prices go up. But there is also this negative effect. And we believe this is because many people don't want to live next to a lot of tourists, a lot of noise, overcrowding, and so on. So when we isolate out the price effect, we actually find a negative effect, this negative externality. The third finding is that the effects are heterogeneous. And the largest effects are for bigger homes, for example, where a family could live. And lastly, we also see that Airbnb changes buyers and sellers' behavior on the housing market. So in the last row here, last column, IV3 is the main result. And as I just said, there is a negative effect. And then below you see the positive price effect, but then a negative effect. And then lastly, there's density effects. So higher density, a higher price effect. And we see that the effects are heterogeneous. So there are effects for all properties, but for one-room apartments where maybe students live, and there is no effect. So that might be that they don't mind so much because of the noise, for example. And this you can also see here. And then we look at the behavioral patterns that changes after the Airbnb enters the market. So here is average time of market before selling. You can see it drastically changes, goes down. And then you also see that the price cap, so the difference between what is advertised for and what is sold for, it also increases. And so when we instrument this, we see that there is something. So we want to instrument it to see if we actually can find effect. We don't find an effect here. And we believe it's because of compounding factors, that we don't have good enough data because we don't have characteristics of seller buyers. And lastly, our conclusion is that there is negative effects, and they're already put in place many policies just as well for tourist tax and limiting supply. But it will be interesting to see in the future if it actually has an effect, and also to decompose this effect in the future, because now last years they've implemented many different kind of policy. So it'll be interesting to kind of try to break them up in the future to see what is really most effective. So that was all I have. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working on this, and really well organized and good case.
Thank you so much, Norwegian School of Economics. That was a delightful presentation, and it was also the last presentation of all the finalists. So thank you again for all the presentations of all the finalists. You all did a great job.
Yeah, if I were a jury, I would have had a really hard time, but we'll see. Well, for all the finalists, we will have a social event at 7:45, so that's in about 1 hour and 45 minutes. Yeah, that will be it. And now we will have a small break.
Yes, and for all the non-finalists, the announcement of the winner will start a little bit after 9. So if you want to see that, we'll see you virtually a bit after 9.